"I never thought a desperate joke about my broken water heater would lead to this," David whispered, watching his son and Katherine slow dance in the middle of the reception hall. The boy's small feet balanced carefully on her silk shoes, his face beaming with pride as wedding guests circled them, capturing the moment on their phones. 5 years ago, David had been a drowning single father working under a boss he secretly admired from afar, making a self-deprecating joke that accidentally revealed the depths of his struggle. Today, as Katherine's husband, he finally understood that sometimes our greatest vulnerabilities become the doorways to our greatest joys. If this story of unexpected love, second chances, and finding family in the most surprising places touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more life-changing stories that remind us how quickly life can transform when we're brave enough to be honest about our struggles. David Chen had mastered the art of appearing completely fine. At 34, he'd perfected the confident smile that hid his exhaustion, the casual shrug that disguised his worry, and the light-hearted jokes that deflected any probing questions about how he was really managing as a single father. His colleagues at Meridian Publishing knew he had a 7-year-old son named Max, but few understood the daily high-wire act that was David's life since his wife's death 3 years ago. Every morning began at 5:30 a.m. with lunch preparation, followed by waking Max, navigating the minefield of a second grader's emotions about everything from mismatched socks to the wrong cereal, dropping him at before-school care, and then racing to make it to the office by 8:30. Every evening was a similar marathon in reverse, with the added pressures of dinner, homework, bath time, and bedtime stories. The weekends weren't much different: laundry, grocery shopping, cleaning, and trying to give Max some semblance of a normal childhood with park visits and playdates. What no one at work knew was that David's apartment building had been experiencing maintenance issues for weeks. The ancient water heater that served his floor had been temperamental at best, leaving them with lukewarm showers more often than not. That Thursday morning, it had finally given up entirely, greeting David with ice-cold water that had him gasping and cursing at 5:45 a.m. By the time he arrived at the office, having dropped off a cranky Max who'd also endured a cold shower, David was in no mood for the news that greeted him. "Morning team meeting in 15 minutes, his colleague Jen announced as he set down his laptop bag. "Katherine wants to discuss the Wilson manuscript revisions." David suppressed a groan. Katherine Winters, the editorial director and effectively his boss, was brilliant, demanding, and intimidatingly put together. At 40, she had built a reputation in publishing for her unerring instinct for bestsellers and her exacting standards. David respected her immensely as a professional, but he'd also harbored a quiet attraction to her since joining Meridian 3 years ago, something he'd never acted on for a multitude of reasons, not least of which was the company's strict policy against relationships between managers and their reports. "Great," he muttered, powering up his computer and quickly reviewing his notes on the Wilson project. He'd been up until midnight finalizing his edits after getting Max to bed, and he wasn't confident he'd caught everything. The meeting went as well as could be expected. Katherine questioned several of his editorial decisions, but he defended them capably, citing market trends and reader feedback from similar titles. By the end, she seemed satisfied, nodding thoughtfully as she made notes in her leather-bound planner. "Good work, everyone," she concluded. "David, could you stay behind for a moment?" His colleagues filed out, several shooting him sympathetic glances that suggested they thought he was in trouble. When the door closed, Katherine turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Your work on Wilson is solid," she began, "but you seem off today. Is everything all right?" David was caught off guard by the personal question. Katherine was professional to a fault, rarely venturing into personal territory with her team. "Just some apartment issues," he said, attempting his usual deflection. "Nothing major." Katherine raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. "You've had dark circles under your eyes for weeks, you were wearing mismatched socks yesterday, and you've been refilling that same coffee mug hourly. As your manager, I need to know if there's something affecting your work." David felt a flash of embarrassment, both at being so transparent and at Katherine noticing such details about him. He ran a hand through his hair, debating how much to reveal. "It's just single-parent stuff," he said finally. "Max is going through a phase where he doesn't want to go to bed. The building's water heater died this morning, so we both had freezing showers, and my babysitter canceled twice last week, which meant I had to bring work home instead of finishing here." He attempted a smile. "But hey, at least I'm saving on hot water bills, right?" The joke fell flat. Katherine studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Do you want to stay tonight?" she asked suddenly. David blinked, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry." "At my place," Katherine clarified, her tone matter-of-fact. "I have a guest room with its own bathroom. The water heater works perfectly fine. You and Max could stay until your building fixes the issue." David stared at her, momentarily speechless. Of all the responses he'd expected, this wasn't even on the list. "That's incredibly kind," he managed finally, "but I couldn't impose like that. We'll be fine. The landlord promised it would be fixed by tomorrow." Katherine's expression softened slightly. "It's not an imposition, David. It's a practical solution. You need hot water, I have extra space, and frankly, I've been concerned about your work-life balance for some time. This might give you a brief respite." David felt a complex mix of emotions, gratitude, embarrassment, and something else he couldn't quite name. The thought of staying at Katherine's home, seeing her outside the office context, felt both appealing and terrifying. "I appreciate the offer, really," he said, "but Max can be a handful, and we have our routines. Plus, there's the whole manager-employee thing." He trailed off, not wanting to imply he was reading anything inappropriate into her offer. Katherine's professional mask slipped back into place. "It was merely a practical suggestion, nothing more. The offer stands if you change your mind." She gathered her materials. "Let's touch base on the Wilson edits tomorrow." As she left the conference room, David felt like he'd somehow failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. The day proceeded normally until mid-afternoon, when David received an email from Max's school. The boy had developed a fever and needed to be picked up immediately. David informed his team he had to leave early, packed up his work, and headed out, already mentally rearranging his evening schedule to accommodate a sick child. Max was pale and miserable when David arrived at the school nurse's office, his small body radiating heat. "Hey, buddy," David said gently, placing a hand on his son's forehead. "Not feeling so hot? Or I guess, feeling too hot?" Max didn't even smile at the weak joke, which told David just how poorly the boy was feeling. "My throat hurts, Daddy," he whispered. "And my head." "We'll get you home and comfortable," David promised, helping Max into his coat. "Some medicine, some soup, and your favorite stuffed dinosaur, okay?" By the time they reached their apartment building, Max was half asleep against David's shoulder. David carried him inside, nodding to the maintenance workers who were still attempting to fix the water heater in the hallway. "Any progress?" he asked hopefully. The older of the two men shook his head. "Parts won't be here until Monday at the earliest." "Sorry, man." David's heart sank. A sick child and no hot water for at least 4 more days. He carried Max into their apartment, settled him on the couch with a blanket and the dinosaur, and took his temperature. 101.3, not emergency level, but definitely concerning. He gave Max some children's fever reducer and set about making chicken soup, all while mentally calculating how he could possibly manage a sick child, work deadlines, and basic hygiene without hot water. The thought of giving Max cold baths while he was already feverish was unthinkable. After an hour of watching Max pick at his soup and drift in and out of restless sleep, David made a decision. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Katherine's contact information, hesitating only briefly before pressing call. She answered on the 3rd ring. "David? Is everything all right? I'm sorry to bother you after hours," he began, "but about that offer, is it still open?" Max came home sick from school, and our water heater won't be fixed until Monday at the earliest. I'm a bit desperate here." There was a brief pause before Katherine responded, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it at work. "Of course it's still open. Do you need help getting here? Does Max need anything specific?" The genuine concern in her voice nearly undid him. "We can manage to get there. He has a fever and sore throat, nothing too serious, but he needs rest and, well, hot water would be nice. Text me when you're on your way," she said. "I'll send you my address and the door code." 30 minutes later, David was guiding a drowsy Max into Katherine's elevator in an upscale building in Brookline. He felt distinctly out of place with their hastily packed overnight bags and Max's dinosaur tucked under the boy's arm. Katherine was waiting at her door when they arrived, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, a far cry from her usual office attire of tailored suits and silk blouses. The casual clothes made her seem more approachable, more human somehow. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "The guest room is all ready." David had expected Katherine's home to be like her office, minimalist, elegant, and impeccably organized. Instead, he found himself in a warm, lived-in space with comfortable furniture, overflowing bookshelves, and art on every wall. It was still elegant, but in a way that invited you to sit down rather than stand at attention. "This is a beautiful place," he said, genuinely impressed. "Thank you," she replied, leading them down a hallway. "The guest room is through here. It has its own bathroom with a tub if Max would like a warm bath." The guest room was spacious and comfortable, with a queen-sized bed covered in a plush duvet and a small trundle bed that Katherine had already prepared. "I thought Max might be more comfortable with you nearby," she explained, noticing David's glance at the trundle. "But if he prefers his own space, the sofa in my office pulls out as well." David was touched by her thoughtfulness. "This is perfect. Thank you, Katherine. I can't tell you how much this means to us." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "It's Katherine outside of work, please. And it's no trouble. I'll let you get Max settled. There's tea and soup in the kitchen when you're ready." As she left, David turned to Max, who was looking around the room with wide eyes despite his fever. "Is this your girlfriend's house, Daddy?" Max asked innocently. David nearly choked. "No, buddy. Ms. Winters is my boss from work. She's just being very kind because our water heater is broken." Max considered this as David helped him change into pajamas. "She's pretty," he observed. "And she has nice books. Can I have a bath? I'm cold." "Of course," David said, grateful for the change of subject. "Let's get you warmed up." The bathroom was as lovely as the rest of the apartment, with a deep tub that Max sank into with a sigh of contentment. David sat on the closed toilet lid, watching his son play weakly with the bath toys Katherine had somehow produced, probably left by nieces or nephews, David assumed. After the bath, Max was visibly more comfortable, though still feverish. David tucked him into the trundle bed with his dinosaur and another dose of medicine. "Try to sleep, buddy," he said, kissing Max's forehead. "I'll be right here if you need anything. Can you ask the book lady if she has any dinosaur stories?" Max murmured, already half asleep. David smiled. "The book lady has a name, Max. It's Katherine. And maybe tomorrow if you're feeling better." Once Max was asleep, David ventured out to the kitchen, where he found Katherine at the island counter, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed a manuscript. She looked up when he entered. "How is he?" she asked, removing her glasses. "Better after a warm bath. Thank you for that." David ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware that he probably looked as exhausted as he felt. "And for the toys. That was thoughtful. They're my nephew's," she explained. "He stays over sometimes. There's soup warming on the stove if you're hungry." David realized he hadn't eaten since lunch. "That sounds amazing, actually." As he served himself soup, Katherine closed her manuscript and studied him. "How long have you been doing this alone, David?" The question was direct but not unkind. David sat across from her at the counter, cradling the warm bowl. 3 years, 2 months, and about 16 days, he answered. "Since Ellie died." Katherine's expression softened. "I knew you were widowed, but I didn't realize it was so recent." "Recent enough that it still feels like yesterday sometimes," David admitted. "Other times, it feels like a lifetime ago." He took a spoonful of soup, surprised by how good it was. "Did you make this?" She smiled. "Contrary to office rumors, I do know how to cook. I just don't have much occasion to do so these days." "It's delicious," he said. "And to answer your earlier question more fully, yes, I've been doing this alone since Ellie died. No family nearby, just a rotation of babysitters and after-school programs and the occasional friend who can take Max for a playdate." "That sounds incredibly challenging," Katherine said, her voice free of the pity David had come to dread in such conversations. "It is," he acknowledged. "But Max is worth every minute of it. He's all I have left of Ellie, and he's everything." They fell into a surprisingly comfortable conversation as David finished his soup. Katherine asked thoughtful questions about Max, offering insights from her experiences with her nephew that suggested she understood children better than her professional demeanor might indicate. David found himself relaxing, sharing stories about Max's dinosaur obsession and his recent school projects. "I should check on him," David said eventually, realizing they'd been talking for over an hour. "Of course," Katherine nodded. "I'll be up for a while if you need anything." David found Max still sleeping peacefully, his fever seemingly reduced. He took a quick shower in the guest bathroom, savoring the hot water after the morning's icy experience, and then settled into the main bed with his laptop to finish some work. He must have fallen asleep mid-document, because the next thing he knew, it was 3 a.m. and Max was standing beside the bed, tears streaming down his face. "Daddy," he whimpered. "I don't feel good." David was instantly alert, reaching for his son. Max was burning up again, his small body trembling with chills despite the warm pajamas. David gave him another dose of medicine and held him close, murmuring reassurances. After 20 minutes with no improvement, David began to worry. Max's fever seemed higher than before, and the boy was becoming increasingly distressed. David was debating whether to call the pediatrician's night line when there was a soft knock at the door. Katherine stood in the doorway in a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I heard voices. Is everything okay?" "His fever spiked," David explained, trying to keep the worry from his voice. "I'm not sure if I should call the doctor or wait it out." Katherine approached, her expression concerned. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward Max. David nodded, and she gently placed her hand on Max's forehead. "That's quite high," she agreed. "My nephew had strep last month with similar symptoms. Do you have a pediatrician you can call?" "Yes, they have a night service," David said, reaching for his phone. "While you do that, let's try to cool him down a bit," Katherine suggested. "Cool compresses might help." She disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a damp washcloth, which she placed gently on Max's forehead. The boy whimpered but didn't protest. David connected with the on-call pediatrician, describing Max's symptoms while Katherine continued to tend to him with a gentleness that surprised David. The doctor advised bringing Max to the emergency room if his fever went above 103 or if he developed any new symptoms, but otherwise suggested continuing with fever reducers and monitoring him closely. "They think it might be strep," David reported after ending the call. "They want to see him first thing in the morning." Katherine nodded. "That makes sense. My sister said strep has been going around the schools." She adjusted the compress.